All right, let's just dive right into this explainer, shall we? Today we're exploring the fascinating reality behind a famous concept you've almost certainly heard of if you've ever traveled, worked, or lived across the continent: African time. We're going to completely unpack the deep architecture of how time is truly experienced, measured, and valued. And honestly, looking at this might just completely change how you view your own daily schedule. I want to start us off with this sort of continental shorthand joke that frames African time to Westerners as just, a polite excuse for being late. Picture a visitor from London or New York sweating in an empty conference room. To them, a meeting starting 2 hours behind schedule feels intensely frustrating, right? It just looks like a cultural failure to respect the clock. Meanwhile, the host strolls in 90 minutes late, completely relaxed, without a hint of apology or stress. And to be fair, a lot of locals use the phrase with the roll of their eyes too, sighing at a wedding that starts way after the invitations claimed it would. But this dynamic brilliantly illustrates our core question today. What if this isn't a failure to respect the schedule at all? What if it's actually a profoundly different philosophical approach to existence? To answer that, we really have to pause and examine the deep assumptions we carry about that ticking watch on our wrists and ask ourselves what time is actually meant to do. Section 1. Inventing the clock, a historical anomaly.
To really understand the African perspective, we first need to flip the script. We often think of our linear, heavily scheduled day as the default human condition, but it's actually a massive historical anomaly. Before the 13th century, time across Europe was task-oriented. You simply worked until the field was sown or the cows were milked, and that was it. But then, Benedictine monks who needed to strictly coordinate their daily prayers created mechanical clocks. Suddenly, time steps out of the monastery and into the marketplace. By the 18th and 19th centuries, industrial capitalism required a whole new kind of person. As historian E.P. Thompson pointed out, workers stopped being paid for a task and literally started selling their time by the hour. By the 20th century, you've got engineers with stopwatches timing every single human motion on the factory floor just to maximize efficiency.
The crucial point here is that we were systematically trained to view time as a literal commodity. As Benjamin Franklin so famously put it, time is money. In this Western model, time is this abstract grid of identical, empty units that can be spent, saved, wasted, or stolen. And it's exhausting, honestly. We feel this profound anxiety about wasting a weekend because time is always ticking away. It's strictly future-facing. But this is not the only way to live, and it is certainly not the only way to measure a life. Section 2. Time as lived events, African conceptions. Now, what's really fascinating is how traditional African thought completely abandons that abstract grid of empty, measurable units. Instead of an invisible container just waiting to be filled with productivity, time is viewed entirely differently. Back in 1969, a Kenyan theologian named John Biddy introduced an incredibly provocative idea. African time is composed strictly of events. If nothing happens, there's literally no time. He used two main concepts. First is sasa, meaning a thick, vibrant present that includes conscious living and even the recently departed who are still remembered. Second is zamani, the great, limitless past where everything finally comes to rest. Because time is made of events that have actually occurred, Biddy famously argued that traditional African time had a vast past, a vivid present, but virtually no future. But actually, hold on, scratch that. We really need to tear down that no future generalization right away. Treating a massive, wildly diverse continent as a single mind is highly problematic. Philosophers like Kwame Jacquier proved that cultures like the Akan in Ghana clearly plan for the future. They have extensive proverbs and agricultural savings practices built entirely around preparing for what's to come. So scholars warn us against what they call ethno-philosophy, which is this dangerous assumption that you can attribute a single frozen mindset to hundreds of millions of vastly different people. When you look at the actual anthropological diversity on the ground, we see incredible event time systems woven directly into daily life. Anthropologist E. E. Evans Pritchard documented the Nuer of Sudan, who used a brilliant cattle clock. They didn't divide the day by hours, but by the rhythm of the herd, the time of milking, the time of moving to pasture. Meanwhile, the Oromo of Ethiopia used the Gada system, which is this highly sophisticated rotating wheel of generation classes that passes political power peacefully every 8 years. And over in West Africa, the Akan and Yoruba structured their entire societies around 4 or 8-day market weeks. Time here isn't an abstract boss yelling at you from a wall. It's the natural rhythm of ecology, trade, and social responsibility. Just take Ethiopia, for example. Incredibly, Ethiopia lives by its own distinct calendar featuring 13 months, 12 months of 30 days, and a tiny 13th month of just 5 or 6 days. Because of a different historical calculation by the early church, they actually run roughly 7 to 8 years behind the Gregorian calendar we use in the West. And their daily clock? It completely blows up our assumptions. In Ethiopia, the day officially starts at dawn. That means 1 o'clock is simply 1 hour after sunrise. Noon by a Western watch is 6 o'clock in the Ethiopian day. Honestly, think about how much more logical that is. This brilliant system anchors time measurement to the universal lived experience of the sun actually coming up, rather than pretending some abstract pitch-black midnight is the start of human activity.
Section 3. Colonizing time, enforcing the grid.
So, all this incredible diversity of indigenous timekeeping violently collided with the arrival of European colonial powers in the late 19th century. Colonialism wasn't just a land and resource grab, right? It was a massive project to forcefully reorganize the temporal lives of millions of people. The colonizers brought the grid. They introduced the rigid railway schedule, the deeply unnatural mind shift, the colonial school bell, and the tax office deadline. They basically exported the strict factory time discipline of Europe and imposed it by sheer force on societies that already had perfectly functional, deeply integrated ways of keeping time.
Which brings us to a much darker truth explored by Congolese philosopher V.Y. Mudingbe. He argued that the very idea of Africa as a timeless, primitive place was an invention of the colonial library, this massive archive of European writings and prejudices. And this forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question. Was the lazy stereotype of African time actually a complete fiction? Was it simply invented by the colonizers' contempt? Frustrated that locals wouldn't conform to their mechanical clocks, and then repeated so often that it just became accepted as truth.
Section 4. Why it persists. Culture and structure. So, if the colonial clock showed up well over a century ago, why on earth does African time and the classically late meeting still persist today? Anthropologist Edward T. Hall explains this perfectly through cultural philosophy. He distinguishes between monochronic cultures like North America, where doing one thing at a time and strictly sticking to a schedule is a sign of ultimate respect. But much of Africa operates as a polychronic culture. Here, you do many things at once, and human relationships are explicitly prioritized over the schedule. Cutting off a greeting with an elder just because a piece of metal on your wrist beeps, that isn't viewed as efficient. It's considered deeply arrogant and incredibly rude.
We really have to untangle 3 different realities here. Yes, there is a deep cultural priority on relationships, but there is also a very real structural reality. Often what a frustrated Westerner might call African time is actually just a highly rational adaptation to structural uncertainty. If you're navigating flooded dirt roads, unpredictable power grids, and a lack of reliable transit, you absolutely have to be flexible. Precision punctuality requires a heavily built, highly predictable environment. When we confuse a broken transport system for a cultural flaw, we fall right into the third trap: tired prejudice. We end up stereotyping basic survival and adaptation as mere laziness.
Section 5. The future of time. Digital transformation.
But look, the continent is changing at lightning speed. It is the world's youngest and fastest urbanizing region. And today, a brand new device is reorganizing time way more profoundly than the colonial railway ever did. The smartphone is a clock that never leaves your pocket. With the massive explosion of mobile money, ride-hailing apps, and the global gig economy, young urban Africans are being rapidly pulled into a strict, deadline-driven hustle. Digital capitalism is demanding down-to-the-second synchronization. But, and this is key, they aren't just completely surrendering to Western norms.
Philosopher Akil Mbembe points out this brilliant entanglement happening right now. Millions of young professionals are engaging in what we can call temporal code switching. They are literally bilingual in time. Picture a young tech worker in Nairobi or Lagos. They might be running a global startup on strict, high-pressure, monochronic deadlines via Zoom all week long. But on Saturday, they seamlessly slip back into deep polychronic time for a 5-hour family wedding, where no one would ever dream of leaving just because the clock says they should.
And this whole hybrid reality isn't just about making things work. It is deeply anchored in the ancient ethic of Ubuntu. As the famous proverb states, a person is a person through other persons. In this worldview, your very humanity is built through your relationships. Therefore, time spent engaging with others, greeting them, listening to them, just being fully present is never, ever wasted time. It is the actual act of becoming human.
Which leaves us with this absolutely massive question to chew on. Our modern clocks ask us constantly how much we can get done, measuring our lives purely by output, optimization, and hours not wasted. But perhaps the persistent heartbeat of event time is asking an older, much more important question. Instead of constantly asking how to fill our time, shouldn't we be asking how we can fill our time with one another?